I live in New York, which means it gets very cold in the wintertime, and I'm not gonna lie, that used to bum me out a good bit, especially being an avid home cook, because winter and the colder months just represented a time of less options, less fresh produce, less things I could create in the kitchen. And then over time, I don't know when this happened, but at some point I started to just accept winter, and my cooking began to evolve and shift for the better. And that's what this video is about. 10 ways that my cooking has grown and shifted and evolved by just accepting everything that comes along with the colder months. All right, I've got a meat delivery to start off the day. These are some lamb shanks, and this is a tougher cut of meat. The shank is one of the toughest cuts on any animal, and in the winter, I like focusing on tougher cuts of meat, things that are gonna take time to cook and break down because I have time in the winter. I'm hanging out, I can watch over a pot that's stewing over time, whereas in the summer, that's when I'll focus on the steaks and the hamburgers, things that can grill up really fast so I can get back to whatever party or activity I'm doing. Now, when it comes to tougher cuts of meat, there are a lot of different options to choose from. If you're confused, just look for stew meat or ask your butcher for stew meat, and it can be a big chunk of meat like this, or you can chop it down into little pieces if you want the process to go a little quicker. So what I like doing on these lamb shanks or any tough cut of meat is getting a nice dry brine going. So I'll season them heavily and throw those in the fridge for at least a few hours. You can keep them in the fridge overnight. And what that's gonna do is get a nice seasoning all the way through the meat and also start the tenderizing process. So the final product is nice and buttery and super tender. I would say the biggest shift in my diet in the winter months over the years has been my increased consumption of fermented foods. You know, I love fermenting foods, but I also just feel better when I eat them all winter long, which totally makes sense because as human beings, refrigeration is brand new technology in the grand scheme of things. So humans had to ferment foods. They had to preserve foods to survive, which means, of course, we evolved to eat a lot of fermented foods. And if you're new to fermenting your own foods at home, but you want to get in the game, I would definitely start out with a simple lacto fermentation process like a sauerkraut. And luckily for you, I made one a few weeks ago. And of course, the base to a sauerkraut is cabbage, but you can customize it with carrots. I'm also adding some caraway seeds, which is a classic sauerkraut spice. And when it comes to lacto fermentation, there's two main key elements you need to focus on, you need to get right. One is the salt ratio, which is about 2 to 3% of the total weight of your actual vegetables. So I'm gonna figure out the final weight of my vegetables, multiply that by 2.5%, and that's the amount of salt I'll add to my cabbage. And now the second key element to lacto fermentation is creating an anaerobic environment, which means an environment without oxygen. And to do that, you're submerging the vegetables in the juices, the natural water content that's actually coming off those vegetables, and then you're using some type of weight system to make sure that those vegetables stay under the water line and in that anaerobic environment where the oxygen can't get in. And then find a cool, dark environment in your house and let that sit for a few weeks. For me, the optimum sauerkraut tanginess is around 3 to 4 weeks of fermentation. So this right here has been fermenting for about 3.5 weeks. You can see the color has shifted a good bit. You never quite know with fermenting how the bacteria, how the yeast are gonna react and alter the flavor. Crunchy. That is delicious. There's a reason caraway seeds are so popular in sauerkraut. One sauerkraut project like this in the beginning of winter, you make a big vat. Trust me, you will be throwing this on everything, and I'll show you later on in this video what I'm gonna be doing with this fermented cabbage. So the next one's pretty obvious, but to really thrive in the winter, you gotta have a well-stocked pantry. But the big shift for me was buying pantry items that were actually quality, things that I could rely on. And one of the best ways to do that brings me to the sponsor of this video, which is Thrive Market, an online membership-based market on a mission to make healthy living easy and affordable for everyone. And it's my favorite way to stock up on pantry items for the winter because I know I can trust all of the products. They're all well-sourced, and the online online shopping experience is optimized, is actually enjoyable. You can shop by diet if you have specific food restrictions, or you can just easily browse through their entire collection, and everything is delivered to you with carbon neutral shipping from their zero waste warehouse. And if I were to give you my top 10 pantry must-haves, the things I use the most in the winter, it would definitely be canned tomatoes, dried fruit of any kind, apple cider vinegar, any type of dried beans or legumes, maple syrup, canned pumpkin, coconut milk or cream, some ground mustard, a lot of decaf tea, and an assortment of dried pasta. So if you're interested in joining Thrive Market, they offer 2 different membership models. They've got the monthly plan and the yearly plan. I'm on the yearly plan, which comes out to $5 a month, but if you're not sure if Thrive is the right fit, you can just try it out for a shorter period of time. And if you click the link below in the description and join Thrive today, you can get 25% off your first order and a free gift, which is awesome. So now that our pantry is stocked with all of these winter items, it's time to cook up some delicious food and put them to good use. Nothing screams more winter than a good stew. You get out the crock pot and you cook something low and slow, which is what I'm gonna be doing with these lamb shanks. So I'm gonna put a little bit of some neutral oil, something that can handle a pretty high heat, that has a high smoke point. Because we're braising these lamb shanks, we're getting a crust on these lamb shanks first, and then we will add all of our other ingredients. But we want that first layer of flavor. And what I'm doing here is just making sure that they're nice and dry. You don't want wet lamb shanks going into hot oil. That's a recipe for disaster. So that's your last key step with these lamb shanks. And these have been dry brining for around 5 hours. So that liquid has first been removed from the salt. Then the salt gets absorbed in the liquid and actually starts penetrating into the meat. And I'm just gonna start searing these. And a stew was something that I really wasn't making when I started cooking. It felt boring. I wanted to make fun things like pizza and hamburgers and exciting looking food, but really this is survival food. This is how you get through the winter and you feed your family, you feed a few people, or just yourself, making a nice big stew. Awesome for meal prep because you can make a nice big batch of it and then freeze the rest. So what I'm looking to do right now is really just brown these on every side. Maximum amount of flavor. So that will take around 5 to 7 minutes to really get these nice and crispy. All right, so you can see pretty clearly level 1 of flavor as I drip grease all over my counter. We're done there. That is the first step of braising. Now, the next phase of any stew is always aromatics. Your heartier veggies that you're gonna cook down and caramelize that are gonna lay the foundation of flavor in your soup on top of all this goodness that's in this pan already. I chose one of my favorite combinations of aromatics, fennel, carrot, and celery. If your pot's looking a little dry, just add a little oil. You definitely want a good bit of oil or fat to get a nice caramelization on these aromatics. And we'll just cook these down. It's gonna take around 10 to 20 minutes. And for this step, it's really important to be patient if you're looking for maximum flavor in your stew. So after the aromatics were cooking for about 10 minutes, I went in with my next level of flavor. I took out a pestle and mortar and added some of my favorite spices, a little bit of coriander seeds, a few cardamom pods, some dried chili, and then 2 cloves of garlic and a knob of ginger. And I gave that a few bashes just to make it into a rough paste and added that into the aromatics so that could toast as well in that oil. And I cooked it for around another 10 minutes until everything was looking nice and caramelized and soft. Aromatics looking incredible, smelling incredible, nice and caramelized. I'm gonna go back in with the lamb shank. This is the second part of braising. We're gonna slow cook it in liquid. And this brings me to my next tip for winter. You can't just stock your pantry and stop there. These pantry goods will be your lifeline in the winter. You gotta get creative with them. So for me, I'm gonna use some diced tomatoes, whereas I would definitely add fresh tomatoes to this stew. I'm gonna take advantage of the canned stuff. There's no point of getting tomatoes out of season. That's the worst mistake you can make. Winter tomatoes are just terrible tomatoes. I'm also gonna use some coconut milk here. If you saw the curry episode that I did, this is taking inspiration from the beef rendang. Coconut milk stewed down over a long period of time just caramelizes so nicely and makes such a creamy, beautiful stew. Now to really bulk this up, what I did last night was I took some of those black beans and some chickpeas, but used whatever dried beans you have or legumes you have, and I soaked them in water. And you can see now we've got chickpeas and black beans that are nicely hydrated, ready to go in this stew and really bulk it up, add some nice nutrition, add some nice flavor. And then the last step would be adding just a little bit of water to this. So I'm just going to cover that meat and let everything cook down for a few hours. There is one more thing I'll be adding, but I'm not ready for it just yet. Hot. So the stew has been on for about 2.5 hours. So it's definitely falling apart. You can see that right there. But I think I want it a little more tender, a little more melty. So I would say about 30 more minutes. But there's one more thing I want to add, which brings me into the next thing I've learned, which is really leaning into root veggies. We're talking the potatoes, the sweet potatoes, onions, things that last a while that you can just throw in your pantry as long as it's a dark place and it's pretty cool. Those things will store for the entire winter basically. So I always have potatoes, sweet potatoes hanging around, and I chopped up a potato and I'm going to add it right in to this stew, which is one final layer of veggie action. It will add texture, it will bulk it up a bit, and also the starch in the potato will thicken this stew just the right amount. So I'll just get that mixed up in there. Pop the lid back on, and cook it for 30 minutes just until those potatoes are perfectly tender. One thing that instantly shifts for me when it starts getting cold, literally that first day it starts getting cold, I just want to bake things. I go from not baking anything in the warmer months to just this intense desire to bake muffins or cookies. And I'm not a great baker per se, but I like it and it's great to have baked goods around. And my recent obsession has been making pies, baking pies. This is a pie crust that I made last night, and I'll have a full video on pies coming soon. But what I'm gonna do is make a fruit pie with some in-season fruit, and it's gonna have a bottom crust, which I'm rolling out right now. And I think what I've been loving about pie making is that it's challenging and it's also fun. And it's nice to have something that really keeps you engaged in the winter. And I've just been absolutely loving trying to get better at pie making. So I'm just gonna keep rolling this out in a somewhat of a circular shape until it fits my pie tin, which it certainly does there. And I will add this pie crust right to the tin. I've got a good bit of extra crust here, so I'm gonna go around and leave around a 1/2 inch of layover, and I'll use that to build up the crust just a little bit so I can fit in more filling. And there you go, bottom crust done. So I'm gonna pop this in the fridge to chill out for a few hours. Let's talk filling for that pie. So of course, you can do whatever you want. You can use some canned goods like the pumpkin I showed you before. For me, I love fruit. I love fruit pies, which is also the reason why I was a little bummed out before when winter came around, because there was less fruit in season, right? Well, that's not totally the case. When you have a seasonal mindset and you really hunt for the stuff that's in season, you can find great fruit. You've got pears and apples that are fresh all season long, at least here on the East Coast. You also have citrus. Citrus is peaking in ripeness, in juiciness, and sweetness in the winter, and I'm gonna be incorporating both of those into this apple pie. So I've got a bunch of apples here, and what I'm gonna do is peel them and then just throw them into a big vat of water with some lemon juice to preserve them a bit so they don't brown. And then once they're all peeled, I'll cut them in half, take out the core, and start slicing them up. If you have a mandolin, of course, this will go much faster. And then I'll put them directly into the pot or pan that I'm actually cooking them in. So to bring this filling together, I'm gonna add some coconut sugar here. You can also use brown sugar or regular sugar. And then I'm gonna take advantage of that winter citrus. So I'm gonna zest in some lemon to this apple pie to give it a little zing. And then I'll also add the juice of half a lemon with a little bit of salt, some some cinnamon, and then you can add some type of starch as well. Tapioca starch or cornstarch will work great to thicken up the juices a little bit. And on a low heat, I'll start cooking that down until those juices start releasing to the bottom of the pan and everything is nice and incorporated. Now, if a lot of juice is released from your apples, what I like to do is strain off those apples and just cook that juice down a little bit until it forms almost a caramel, so my pie isn't too wet. And then I'll add that caramel back to the apples, incorporate everything evenly, and throw that in the fridge until it is nice and cool. In the meantime, I can get out that top layer of pie dough, start rolling that out to make my lattice, which is just a little extra design element that I like doing, especially in the winter when I need things to occupy my mind and make me happy. Now, once the strips are formed, it's time to lattice up this pie, which is a really simple, just over-under weaving technique. It's not rocket science. And then I'll trim the excess and I'll start crimping in those edges to make sure I have a nice seal around the outside of my pie. And then I'll toss that back into the fridge to set for about an hour, and then it's time to bake. So the last step is adding a little bit of egg wash to the top of the pie so it's nice and shiny and glistening and golden brown. And then I'll sprinkle on some cinnamon sugar just to give it a little extra flavor and caramelization to the top. And then it's into the oven at a higher temperature, 425 degrees, for about 30 minutes to really puff up that crust. Then I'll lower the temperature down to 350 degrees until that caramel apple juicy juice is just bubbling on out of that pie. One obvious game changer for me that started about 5 years ago that I get so excited for every winter is just sourdoughing everything. And what I mean by that is getting a nice active starter, feeding this every day so you can use this as the main yeast source for all of your bread products. And I know a lot of you can relate to this on so many different levels. Number one, in the winter, I am just craving carbs all the time. So you might as well make those carbs the best and most nutritious version of carbs that you can put in your body using your sourdough starter. And also, it's just a little more depressing in the winter. You wake up and it's dark outside, and for me, all of that seasonal depression disappears when I've got a nice proofed loaf ready to go in the oven for baking. It's an exciting endeavor, it's challenging, and most importantly, it gives you something to look forward to. And then in the end, you have a beautiful loaf of homemade sourdough bread. And even if it doesn't come out right, if you're just getting started on your sourdough journey and you're messing up, you can still toast it up and make a sandwich or turn into croutons. Endless options, but I can't tell you how much sourdough bread I eat in the winter. It is insanity. When food's really good, there's not too much to say. I don't know what to say. That's just really good. There's one thing I'll leave you with as I look at this delicious food. One of the biggest transformations that happen with my cooking is just opening up more to comfort food. Comfort food can get a pretty bad rap for being unhealthy, but we need food that's gonna comfort us in the winter because it's long and it's cold, and food can bring us that joy. And if you're making the food from scratch, you're putting in quality ingredients, and you're making with love, well, you can eat food like this all winter long. So it's time for me to dig in, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks again to Thrive Market for sponsoring this video. Make sure you check out the description below for your special offer.